Welcome to Democracy Now!, democracynow.org, the War and Peace Report. I'm Amy Goodman. Former President Donald Trump won the Republican primary in New Hampshire, defeating former South Carolina Governor Nikki Haley, who once served as Trump's UN ambassador. Trump won by about 11 percentage points. He got 54.5% of the vote. Haley received about 43%. On Tuesday night, Nikki Haley vowed to stay in the race.
Well, I have news for all of them. New Hampshire is first in the nation. It is not the last in the nation. This race is far from over.
During his victory speech, Donald Trump stood alongside two of his former rivals, South Carolina Senator Tim Scott and Vivek Ramaswamy. Trump called Haley an imposter and falsely claimed he'd won the general election in New Hampshire twice before, even though he lost to Hillary Clinton in 2016 and to Joe Biden in 2020.
This is a great, great state. You know, we won New Hampshire 3 times now, three. We win it every time. We win the primary, we win the generals, we've won it, and it's a very, very special place to me. It's very important.
With his victory on Tuesday, Trump becomes the first non-incumbent Republican candidate to win both the Iowa caucus and New Hampshire primary in the modern era as he moves closer to a rematch with President Joe Biden in November. Biden wasn't on the ballot in New Hampshire's Democratic primary, but he still won the state as a write-in candidate. Biden didn't run in the primary after New Hampshire refused a request by the Democratic National Committee to move its primary until after South Carolina's. Biden's final vote count is still being tallied. Congressmember Dean Phillips placed second with about 20% of the vote. Marianne Williamson placed third with about 5%. You can see our interview with her at democracynow.org. We'll have more on the primary. We'll be going to New Hampshire after headlines. Israel's killed at least 210 Palestinians in Gaza over the past 24 hours as it intensifies its bombardment of the city of Khan Yunis. Israel's issued new evacuation orders to over 500,000 Palestinians in Khan Yunis, where many had sought refuge from Israel's attacks in the northern Gaza Strip. On Tuesday, at least 6 Palestinians died when a missile hit one of the UN's largest shelters in Khan Yunis. The British news outlet, ITV, filmed Israeli forces fatally shooting a Palestinian man in Gaza shortly after he gave an interview about trying to help others evacuate to a safe area. The shocking footage shows Ramzi Abu Salul shot as he stood with several other men, one carrying a white flag. This is part of ITV's report, beginning with the words of Ramzi Abu Salul.
The Israelis came to us and told us to evacuate, but they didn't let my brother out. We want to go and try to get them, God willing.
The interview complete, our cameraman walked away. And then this happened. The interviewee had been shot and fatally wounded. You can see them place their flag on his chest. As he was carried away, the white flag was turning red.
At the United Nations, Secretary General Antonio Guterres reiterated his call for a Gaza ceasefire.
The entire population of Gaza is enduring destruction at a scale and speed without parallel in recent history. Nothing can justify the collective punishment of the Palestinian people.
The UN Secretary General went on to criticize statements by Israeli Prime Minister Benjamin Netanyahu and other Israeli leaders opposing a two-state solution.
Last week's clear and repeated rejection of the two-state solution at the highest level of the Israeli government is unacceptable. This refusal and the denial of the right to statehood to the Palestinian people would indefinitely prolong a conflict that has become a major threat to global peace and security.
Guterres' comments came as the Wall Street Journal reports a group of 5 Arab countries have proposed a plan to end the war in Gaza and create a pathway toward a Palestinian state. As part of the deal, Saudi Arabia would also recognize the State of Israel. Israel's revealed more details about how 21 Israeli soldiers died in a single incident in Gaza Monday. The IDF says the reservists were planting explosive mines to blow up 2 buildings in eastern Gaza. During a firefight, Hamas militants hit one of the mines, setting off a chain reaction that toppled the buildings with Israeli troops trapped inside. Israel says the buildings were being leveled to create a so-called buffer zone in eastern Gaza. The Intercept reports this appears to be the first time the Israeli military has publicly admitted that it's systematically destroying whole areas of Gaza with the intent of depopulating the area. President Biden traveled to Virginia Tuesday for a campaign rally focused on abortion rights. Biden's speech was interrupted at least 13 times by protesters calling for him to support a ceasefire in Gaza. One protester screamed out, "Genocide Joe, how many kids have you killed today?"
Sit down.
The New York Police Department has launched an investigation after pro-Palestinian students at Columbia University were sprayed on Friday with a hazardous, foul-smelling chemical during a campus protest. 8 students were hospitalized. The group Students for Justice in Palestine has alleged the chemical attack was carried out by 2 students who are former members of the Israeli military. No arrests have yet been made. The U.S. military's carried out strikes inside both Yemen and Iraq as fears of a regional war in the Middle East grow. In Iraq, the U.S. hit 3 sites connected to a militia with ties to Iran. Iraq's National Security Advisor, Qasem al-Araji, condemned the attack, saying, quote, "The U.S. should pile on pressure for a halt to the Israeli offensive in Gaza rather than targeting and bombing the bases of an Iraqi national body," unquote. Meanwhile, the U.S. bombed Yemen again earlier today, targeting what officials described as Houthi anti-ship missiles. This comes as Houthi forces continue to target commercial ships in the Red Sea and the Gulf of Aden as part of a campaign to pressure Israel to halt its assault on Gaza. A Russian transport plane reportedly carrying 65 Ukrainian prisoners of war has crashed in Russia's Belgorod region near Ukraine. According to Russian media, all 74 people on board died. Russia's foreign ministry has accused Ukraine of downing the military plane, but provided no evidence. Ukraine said it's investigating what happened and has accused Russia of, quote, carrying out special information operations directed against Ukraine. The crash comes a day after at least 18 Ukrainians were killed and 130 were injured as Russia fired a barrage of missiles at several cities, including Kyiv and Kharkiv. Ukrainian President Volodymyr Zelensky said 130 residential buildings were struck in the attacks Tuesday. In other news from Europe, Sweden's now a step closer to joining the NATO military alliance. On Tuesday, the Turkish parliament voted to finally approve Sweden's membership. This leaves Hungary as the only country remaining that needs to approve Sweden's accession. This comes as 90,000 troops from the United States and other NATO nations are preparing to take part in NATO's largest military drills since the Cold War. The bulletin of the atomic scientists is warning the world remains as close to global annihilation as ever before. The bulletin has announced its doomsday clock remains at 90 seconds before midnight, where it was first set for the first time last year. Princeton University professor Alex Glazer spoke Tuesday.
When we set the clock last year, there were major concerns that nuclear weapons could be used in Ukraine. And today's clock setting was still overshadowed by the war in Ukraine, but also the war in Gaza. which has caused enormous human suffering and could lead to a broader conflict in the region involving several nuclear weapon states and regional powers.
A U.S. federal appeals court revived a $10 billion lawsuit filed by the Mexican government against U.S. gun makers. In 2021, Mexico sued 6 gun manufacturers, including Glock and Smith & Wesson, for aiding and abetting the unlawful transfer of hundreds of thousands of guns annually into Mexico, helping to fuel drug cartel violence. Mexico estimates 70% of the guns trafficked into Mexico come from the United States. In related news, Mexico's calling on the Biden administration to investigate how drug cartels are increasingly obtaining U.S. military-grade weapons, including rocket launchers, grenades, and belt-fed machine guns. The Los Angeles Times has laid off about 115 journalists, slashing the size of its newsroom by 20%. Many of those who lost their jobs were journalists of color, including Jean Guerrero, who was the only Latina columnist for the opinion desk. The paper also laid off its only reporters who focus on covering Black and Asian communities in Southern California. The layoffs are the largest at the L.A. Times since billionaire Patrick Soon-Chung bought the paper in 2018. In other media news, Time magazine's laid off 30 journalists. That's 15% of its unionized editorial staff. Meanwhile, the Baltimore Sun is in a state of turmoil after it was recently purchased by David Smith, the chair of the right-wing news network, Sinclair. And those are some of the headlines. This is Democracy Now!, democracynow.org, the War and Peace Report. I'm Amy Goodman in New York, joined by Democracy Now! Co-host Juan Gonzalez in Chicago. Hi, Juan.
Hi, Amy, and welcome to all of our listeners and viewers across the country and around the world.